Are you happy with the state of our country? I'm not. I'm Rob Richardson, engineer, political activist, and advocate for change. I've spent the last 2 decades fighting for the average person. Disruption is not a compromise. Let's shake things up a bit, challenge the status quo, and focus on what's really important to you. Welcome to Disruption. Welcome to Disruption, and it's an honor to be here. We want to talk about, today we are discussing criminal justice reform, why it's such an important issue, not only in Ohio, but really in the nation. With me is candidate for Attorney General Steve Dettelbach, and also Bishara Addison, who focuses on workforce development and actually moving people who have come out of the criminal justice system into employment. Very important things we want to talk about. I want to kind of give a background for some of our listeners and really try to crystallize why this is such an important issue. The United States of America, we like to call ourselves land of the free, home of the brave, but we can challenge that first assumption. We lock up more people than any other nation in the entire world. If you think about it for a minute, we have more people in prison than China, Russia, any other nation. And why is that? If you look at it, it particularly comes down to those who have dealt with drugs. How we prosecute the people who have been users of drugs, who are addicts, we often lock them away when it's not necessary. And what has that meant? That has meant that we've had opportunity cost loss, and it's also meant that we've spent too much money as a state and as a nation. So I want to bring my 2 guests to really talk about this. And Steve, I want to start with you. You've been a prosecutor before. You've seen this side of it. You've certainly worked to prosecute criminals and put people away that should be put away. I want to make this clear. Of course, we want to have a system that protects people, but that's not usually the problem that we're talking about. As a prosecutor, what do you see the role as a prosecutor in actually making sure we have more equitable sentencing, and that we treat people in such a way that we don't lock them up unnecessarily, and that we're reforming the system? What role do prosecutors have in this?
Prosecutors should be playing a leading role in making sure that we're not only talking about being tough on crime, but we're talking about being smart on crime. When I think of dealing with the problems of community safety, I think of this problem like a stool with 3 legs. One leg is enforcement. Boy, we spend a lot of time and effort talking about enforcement. Unfortunately, a stool can't stand on just one leg. The other 2 legs are prevention and reentry, right? So making sure that we're spending enough resources to give people options so that we're helping them not to get into crime in the first place. And then at the back end, making sure that when people come back into society from being incarcerated, that they have a fair chance at a life that is crime-free, instead of setting them up for failure by sending them out unprepared and unemployed. So to me, prosecutors should be talking a lot, not just about enforcement, but about prevention and reentry. In the enforcement space, in that one side of the 3-legged stool, we should be talking about doing, again, a more targeted job of enforcement, just what you said, which is, look, there are certainly people that need to be prosecuted. There are certainly people that need to be put in handcuffs, right? But there are plenty of people who don't need handcuffs, they just need a hand. Right? They're having problems that are medical problems. They're having problems that are addiction problems. And by criminalizing all of those situations, we have imposed on our country and our society a huge cost, right? Cost in money, a cost in the future of our generations of people whose families have been disrupted, a moral cost, a division in our country. And it's time for people, and I've seen this, people in law enforcement are talking about this like they've never talked it before. People in both parties are talking about this like they've never talked about it before. And really, prosecutors should be right at the center of that conversation.
And I actually want to get to Bishara on this, but I have one more question for you. With me is Steve Dettelbach, who is a candidate for Ohio Attorney General, as well as Bishara Addison, who deals with workforce employment and helping people move to, once they get out of the criminal justice system, into opportunities. A lot of people don't understand, Steve, the tremendous amount of power a prosecutor has. A prosecutor has essentially discretion to charge or not to charge. And so when I think about the role that prosecutors play, they also have they have a role in not only saying how severe of a punishment one should get, but whether or not one should charge. And there are real disparities within the system, and they usually come down to race and class. What do you think can be done to address that issue, and what can you do if you were elected the next Attorney General of Ohio to address that?
Well, some of the problems that we have are based upon the actual laws that are on the books, right? So the best example of that we saw with the crack powder disparity. In the 80s, we had a cocaine problem in this country, and cocaine basically came in two forms, crack and powder cocaine. Crack cocaine, as it turns out, was used in urban areas and by more people who happened to be African American. Powder cocaine was used in the suburbs and by a crowd that more often was diverse and white. And we made crack cocaine, the penalties for crack cocaine, 100 times harsher than the penalties for powder cocaine. If we're going to have laws like that, we're going to get massive disparities. But the laws aren't the only problem. The other problem are that people, many of whom, by the way, are really well-intentioned people, are not tuned into these disparities and differences. Every single person, me, you, we all walk around with sometimes implicit biases or prejudices, just based on how we were brought up, how we see the world. And those, if we're not careful, can lead unconsciously to us acting in ways that aren't equal in terms of how different people are treated. So one of the things that we need to keep doing and do more of is training people about how to weed those implicit biases out of the way that they act when we're in the criminal justice system. Another thing we need to do is we need to fight hard to make sure that the criminal justice system itself, prosecutors, police, judges, parole officers, probation officers, guards and prisoners, everybody actually is a diverse section from the entire community, right? So that people can understand that our entire community needs to be part of the system, so it's not just certain people imposing the system on others.
Yeah, so I actually want to turn to Bishara. I want to talk about when we know that those who are in prison, 90% of the folks are going to come out. So we have a vested interest to make sure that folks have an opportunity to have a good career when they come out and have that opportunity. Two questions. What challenges do you see currently within the state of Ohio that make it harder than it has to be for folks to re-enter into the workforce? And then two, what can we do to actually address those issues?
Great questions, and I'll start by saying that it's a really critical issue in Cuyahoga County, and so there are 3 counties throughout our state. You have Cuyahoga County, Franklin County, Hamilton County, and you add Summit on there as well if you want to add a 4th, where we have the highest rate of individuals returning from prison, from state prison in particular. So I think about 3,500 individuals a year return to Cuyahoga County. Some of those individuals are returning because we have more resources than other counties to serve individuals with criminal records who are returning, but many claim Cuyahoga County as their home. Secondly, the recidivism rate, which is when individuals who have returned from prison end up reoffending, the 3-year recidivism rate for Cuyahoga County is about 28%. That actually has gone down over the years, and so we should applaud some of the work that the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections has done to implement programming within the prisons. Right. However, that number is still too high because that is a safety issue. Every time someone reoffends, there is a victim on the other end of that. And so we want to make sure that not only are we creating communities where individuals feel welcome and are set up for success, but we also want to make sure that we don't have future victims because our systems failed or did not appropriately address the needs of individuals that led them to being incarcerated in the first place.
That's a great point.
So what challenges do we face? As it relates to employment, fair hiring is a huge issue. So will employers accept individuals with records, particularly those that are recently released? Many employers do follow EEOC guidelines. It's the law of the land, at least for the time being, that they should be following. However, it's not enforced at the level that it should be.
Right.
And there's a lot of discrepancy in how to go about following that. Now, there are organizations like the Ohio Justice Policy Center in Cincinnati, I think your hometown,
David
that have
Singleton,
done,
good friend of mine.
Yes, they've done significant work in creating toolkits for employers, as well as the National Employment Law Project at the federal. They're a national organization. So if employers are looking for tools to be able to work with individuals who have records and how you go about hiring them and what are the tools and resources available at the state level, then those are the organizations I would definitely refer to. Because they have created a lot of tools for employers. But making those tools available and making sure that employers use them are two different things. And there's an economic cost to individuals not working. And so when individuals are not working, they're not paying child support, they're not paying taxes, they're on public benefits. And so if we want to actually move individuals to a point where they're not only not reoffending, but they're also able to contribute to society and their families, and we all know that two-parent homes are the best way to help, one of the tools in which it helps children be successful in school.
Right.
Well, we have a lot of children who are in single-parent homes or living with a grandparent or some other family guardian because they have parents incarcerated. And so if we want to be able to help unite families and actually create opportunities for our children, then we've got to think critically about this. We also, for the economic cost, individuals who are not working are also not contributing to our economy. And we have a lot of employers who are saying that they are just dying for workers, particularly in manufacturing and frontline positions.
Right.
Well, this is a population that with the appropriate investments while someone's incarcerated, where they have a chance to retool and reskill, could be excellent employees in these companies.
Well,
and so we're missing a
excellent
talent
point.
pool.
You make an excellent point there, because I want to interrupt you for a second. I hear a lot. You will hear employers. So I've been involved in university. I was on the board of University of Cincinnati for 9 years, partner with a lot of employers. What you are hearing constantly over and over again is that we have a shortage of workforce talent.
Skills gap.
You're right. And it's interesting, but you have all these potential workers. If we invested in that versus actually locking people up unnecessarily, we could actually get more people trained and ready for that. So when we often talk on the show, why should I care? There's a few reasons why you should care about this issue. This is not just for people who you say just committed a crime and they need to pay the punishment. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a system that burdens all of us, because we have people that we're paying a lot for this, billions. The state of Ohio pays billions, nearly $2 billion a year we spend on the correction facilities. And instead of actually investing in education, we're the fourth largest prison population. We have more people in prison in the state of Ohio than New York. That makes no sense, and that's because of how our laws have been administered, and it's denying people opportunities, and it's costing us way too much money. So that's why we should care, and you make a lot of great points. As I want to close this, what is it that people need to know? I want both of you to really think about what is the final takeaway that you want our listeners to know on disruption. You can start with you, Bishara.
I'll start off. You had a second question around what can be done.
Yes.
So in addition to employers adopting fair hiring policies, it's about if we are thinking about criminal justice reform and reducing costs, any savings gained in reducing those costs, making sure that they're allocated in a way that allows for those resources to help individuals skill up to meet employer needs. And so you could easily say, hey, we're going to reduce costs at the state level because incarcerating folks is really, really expensive. It costs more than a college education, so you might as well just give people the college education. But if you are seeing a savings without reinvesting those dollars into making sure that individuals can take advantage of their second chances, then what you're not doing is creating an environment where those individuals can be set up for success. So when we think about criminal justice reform and smart on crime policies, and as well as figuring out ways to reduce costs within the correctional system, making sure that those investments do play out well for the communities that are receiving the individuals who are coming home. So I would say that is something that's really important about what we should be thinking about, and also taking into consideration that there's so many complexities to the criminal justice system that someone experiences. So someone comes into the system, not everyone that is that has a criminal record has been incarcerated. And so when I talk about the 3,500 number that is returning to Cuyahoga County, that does not include individuals that have federal offenses. It doesn't include individuals who cycle in and out of the system without actually spending any prison time. And so we have a number of individuals with criminal records. That is our Northeast Ohio workforce. And so we have to take into consideration that these individuals are coming through the system, picking up debt, because they may not necessarily know how to navigate a poverty affidavit to be able to cover court costs or to cover fees. And so these individuals have everything stacked against them. And so even if they try and get their lives back on track, there's all of these pieces that are still hanging over their heads. How do I pay back the court system? Is that something that they're thinking about? Do they forget to show up for a court hearing if they have a warrant out for their arrest? You can get a warrant for your arrest just by not showing up for court because you didn't pay some sort of ticket. And so we have these individuals that have all of these issues, and the reason why they have them is because there's other things going on in their lives that are so complex that it's difficult to manage. And so we have to have a human-centered view on what it takes to help move someone out of poverty and away from the criminal justice system. And if you're thinking that these are just individuals that have committed a crime and deserve to be punished, then you're missing the human aspect of how someone ended up in the system in the first place, and it's usually because they've been failed by other systems. And so we have to think broadly about how we make sure that our systems are resourced appropriately so that individuals are not going into the system, set up for success, and that we have a compassionate approach to helping individuals take advantage of a second chance. And I call that restorative justice.
Very well said. Steve, final thoughts.
The show's called Disruption. So I think, what I'd say, final thought, is that people out there need to disrupt the old conversation. And that's what I see happening. So the old conversation was an us versus them conversation. It was about either you were tough on crime or weak on crime. I see so many people out there already crossing over those lines. I see people who are really interested in restorative justice, but who also understand that there are people who actually are violent and need to be prosecuted. They want their neighborhoods to be safer. And then I see people who are, people who traditionally would have been more concerned with punishment, who are now waking up to the idea that we can't afford to just have a one-size-all solution and just lock up and throw away the key for people who we ought to be trying to save and help. And you see this in the political process, where you see Republicans and Democrats alike working on this. I did a reentry conference when I was U.S. Attorney, and my co-host for the conference was Rob Portman and you see, I went to a meeting at the ACLU where people were upset with the police for not being present enough in their neighborhoods. Right. I see all sorts of people who understand that this conversation needs to be a conversation and not a fight and a debate. And we can make progress. We're at a point, sort of a crucial turning point in the criminal justice system, where there is enough momentum behind viewing things differently that if we can focus on some of the real solutions that you mentioned, we can actually make some progress here. Now, we're not going to fix everything in a day or a week or a month or a year or maybe even a decade. But I see some real opportunity for improvement and change if we can work together and actually focus on solutions instead of just slogans.
Well, to close out, Steve Dettelbach, former U.S. Attorney General and now candidate for Ohio Attorney General, and Bishara Addison, who works every day to make sure that we are providing people opportunities to move out of the criminal justice system and into opportunities. We all have a role. We can all make a systemic difference, but we all have to do our part to make that happen. Disruption with Rob Richardson. Thank you for joining us.